Hello, John.
Hello, Oliver.
Today we're going to talk about the 2018 presidential campaign. First person we're going to talk about, of course, is Michael D. Higgins, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the candidates. So my first question to you is, can Michael D. Higgins be trusted after his many U-turns?
Well, the media don't seem to be referring to the U-turns that he is undertaking, but one of the main things that he said at the 2011 presidential election was that he was going to serve one term because of his age and the fact that if it wasn't for the hatchet job that was done against Sean Gallagher, who was the favourite of the people at the time, an independent, not part of the political establishment, he was destroyed about 2 days or 3 days before the actual presidential election, when he was well ahead and was going to be elected president. But Mr. Pat Kenny presented this programme. I don't know if it was a primetime programme or what, but Sean Gallagher was on it, and he was shafted by a Fine Gael woman activist in the audience at the time. McGuinness, the Sinn Féin candidate, the late McGuinness, and also a purported phone call, all arranged in such a way as to destroy the chances of Sean Gallagher. And he had not enough time to refute all these allegations that were thrown at him by the presenter, Pat Kenny, by a concerted effort to destroy him, because the political establishment could not condone an independent winning the presidency of this country.
Michael D. Higgins preaches socialism, but he lives like a capitalist. Is he paid too much?
Well, he's paid the salary that goes with the president office, but he's a socialist and espouses this philosophy, which, wherever it has been practiced, has turned out to be a disaster for citizens, particularly communism in Russia and communism in Cuba, which he supports in his pronouncements. So Michael D. Higgins, as a socialist, should have taken the average industrial wage salary and donated the balance to perhaps charitable causes, hopefully some Catholic ones, although being a socialist and to all intents and purposes an atheist, he would not be supporting Catholic charities. For example, the protection of life.
Charles Haughey used to tell people to tighten their belts while he was living like a king, which is quite similar to Michael D. Higgins preaching socialism and living like a king. Can you see similarity between the two?
Not at all. Charlie Haughey, the one good thing that he did was in the 1983 referendum for same-sex marriage, supported by Gareth Fitzgerald, the leader of Fine Gael, who was a media darling, and the Fine Gael party, the media, all supported same-sex marriage and called it marriage equality. But Charlie Haughey was the leader of Fianna Fáil in the Dáil and had a good number of TDs. He opposed it, so there was a debate in the Dáil, and that proposal by the Fine Gael party, the Labour Party and socialists like Michael D. Higgins and his ilk were defeated. They didn't get their wish. But from that time on, they conspired to try and bring it in, and then with the connivance of the media this time and the lack of debate in the Dáil, to the eternal discredit of the Fianna Fáil party led by Micheál Martin, who might as well have been in the government because he didn't oppose these various things that this Fine Gael anti-Catholic government brought in.
It sounds like, John, that you're saying that Charles Haughey was a better man than Michael D. Higgins. Is that correct?
Well, he was, at least, in some ways he was. He did a lot for the country that, unfortunately, his lifestyle it didn't mirror what he actually did. He brought in free travel for older folk. Now every Tom, Dick and Harry from across Europe is able to avail of this if they come here and have no means and be housed and have free travel. I've seen it. But it was for older folk that he brought it in. He also helped the disadvantaged farmers in Connemara who were barely surviving. He gave them some bit of alleviation for their tough situation they were in. He also was responsible for the financial centre in Dublin there, which is a great success and which was a derelict corporation or the Harbour Commissioner's site. I remember it. It was just a desolate looking place. The same as a lot of the city was desolate looking. So Charlie did some good, a lot of good, but unfortunately his some other aspects weren't so good, and of course the media was very much anti-Charlie.
I think Charlie Haughey was actually behind the tax breaks for the film industry in Ireland also.
Correct. He certainly was. So his policies created jobs, and by the way, jobs that are not dependent on foreign manufacturers or foreign companies. Multinationals. A lot of the support that he gave was actually jobs in this country. So Charlie wasn't as bad as what he's often portrayed.
Do you think Michael D. Higgins supports an anti-family agenda when you look at all of repeal the age, abortion, divorce? It seems to be.
Well, I think that's the policy of socialists. His Labour Party, of which he was a member and which he was a TD for years and a minister in a coalition government, that party has been anti-Catholic throughout its history as far as I can see, especially since the like of Michael D. Higgins and Gilmore, the former leader of the party who closed the Irish embassy to the Vatican. Apparently the most stupid, ignorant and asinine decision that any person could make, but he did it with the connivance of the Fine Gael party, and we know what they stand for.
Michael D, when he was speaking about the Klein report and he was talking about the Tuam babies, he asked the question, how could it ever be acceptable that you should have a separate legal system and that placed itself above the legal system of the state, in which the state is responsible to the people? What do you think of that remark?
Well, I think it's just a sort of a remark that a socialist would make, but I think also in that remark he said that this was responsible for the decline of the Catholic faith in Ireland. We well know what led to that, which is the constant onslaught, attacks by the state broadcaster RTE and other media outlets, the constant attack on the Catholic faith and the practice there too. The business of what he had to say there about the Klein report, which was a government-inspired report, exaggerating everything that they possibly could and giving it all, with the help of the media, all the slant towards abuse when there was a lot of good done. Throughout the world, it's Catholic organisations that are providing help and sanctuary for the third world countries. It's not socialists or anybody else like that. Socialists, when they're in charge of a country, destroy the country. Venezuela is a perfect example of it. Cuba would be another example, which Mr. Higgins supports. I can honestly say that the business of the Tuam babies, for example, is misinformed. The nuns in that place looked after women who were rejected by society and rejected by the government of the day. The nuns did a marvellous job, and when they looked for these stillborn babies, which they were, to be buried in the cemetery, the council at the time refused. I suggest Mr. Higgins and the socialists should read Jacinta Prunty's book about that event in Tuam, and they would, of course, the truth doesn't suit them. To have a narrative, and even if it's false, they promote it as if it's true.
I mentioned already that he said, how could it be acceptable that there would have a separate legal system for the church? Of course, the church doesn't have a legal system. The church is not a legal system at all. It is a moral code of conduct for society based on the Bible.
Correct. And so this is another untruth that the socialists utter. And of course, one cannot take an opinion from socialists as regards the spiritual development of Irish people and the human person. You cannot persecute. The Catholics in this country were persecuted for centuries by a foreign organisation like Britain, a foreign country that tried to impose its views and laws on this country and didn't succeed. But now here we have our own government led by the like of the Labour Party and the Fine Gael Party doing what they couldn't do.
Finally, do you think Michael D. Higgins, finally, when I say finally, I mean finally, my last question on Michael D. Higgins, will move on to the rest of the candidates. Do you think he'll be re-elected?
Well, personally speaking, I hope not, because he hasn't got a ward. He said he was just doing one term when I think Sean Gallagher was likely to win it. But then Sean Gallagher was shafted, as I said earlier. So when he said that he was just going to do one term because of his age, he doesn't seem to have a ward. If his ward then doesn't count, what's he at doing another term when it's quite clear that his ward is not his bond?
Okay. We're going to move on to the next candidate, Peter Casey. He made controversial remarks about the Travellers. You know those remarks. What do you think of what he said?
Well, no, it was the media made out that they were controversial and have not dined off it, they've attacked them because that's the media spin. That unfortunately what we have in this country is not journalists that examine issues in the full sense of the word. They are scaremongers. And Mr. Casey said something that a lot of people would sympathise with. A lot of people, including myself and thousands of people, have to save and pay for their houses and do without for years. But the Travellers have been supplied with houses, 5 houses I think, that cost 1.7 million euros in Tipperary, and apparently they're refusing to occupy those houses because they want extra land supplied by the state and the council for horses. Well, houses are for human beings. If they have a desire to have horses, they should have some other way of dealing with that and not expect the state to supply a house and then land for horses, because the rest of us are lucky to have a house with a bit of a garden and all the rest of it, which we have to look after. We're not supplied with all these perks that the Travellers are supplied with. So Mr. Casey just referred to that, and it turns out that you can't say anything, as he said. It's this political correct nonsense that passes for debate in this country. It's not debate at all. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. And he was attacked by the state broadcaster. He was attacked by the media and hounded. Articles written by different people about him trying to destroy him.
What do you think of Peter Casey as a candidate?
Well, he's I think he's calling a spade, and really this business of what we have in the Dáil, the way what they have supported, the same-sex marriage referendum and abortion, I mean, perhaps he has principles. I don't see much evidence of principles with the socialists or the parties in the Dáil. I don't see any evidence of it, except with a few exceptions.
I spoke to a few people in the south of Ireland over the last couple of days, particularly farmers, and he seems to have a lot of votes. He will get a lot of votes from the farming community, and I think it's because of his remarks about travellers being on other people's land?
Well, I think so, because farmers in the country are put to the pinnacle of what with animals being stolen. Apparently, the Gardaí, with all the closed Garda stations that this Fine Gael Labour government implemented, the country is at risk. Towns and villages are at risk where there's no Gardaí or there's no security presence. So this is, instead of this government concentrating on the like of that and doing something for the safeguard of people, Mr. Casey, Peter Casey seems to have addressed that issue, and thanks for the goodness. And I think I'd like to see more people like him dealing with the real problems that we have in the country. Anybody goes down the country can see the decline of the towns and villages. It's the saddest sight I've ever seen in my time, because I remember the one that were thriving. And with the policies of this government and previous governments, they've managed to destroy the country, yet they'll go to the country looking for votes. They don't deserve anyone. This crowd in the Dáil deserves no votes from anyone, and I hope other parties step forward that stand for the betterment of Irish society and not the destruction of it, as is occurring at the present time.
Now, we move on to Sean Gallagher. We've already mentioned Sean Gallagher, but do you think he's too young to be president? Or should the presidency be reserved for somebody who are more older type statespeople?
No, obviously not. I think if you're over 35, you're entitled to be a presidential candidate if you've got enough support from county councils for thinking this, that and the other, and maybe from some other types of people. Now, of course, it's not. He's not too old. He would have been elected 7 years ago. Only, as I said earlier, he was shafted by the media, RTE, the state broadcaster. So he's having a go again, and he's declined to be on debates because Mr. Higgins has decided not to take part in the debate, because I presume he would be asked questions. This is if the media are not in supporting him by not asking the sort of questions which it should ask.
So Gavin Duffy, what do you think of Gavin?
Well, he's a credible candidate. As a matter of fact, I'd go to some far as to say that all the candidates are, would be good, with the exception of one. And I think that in my view, would be, perhaps two, but would be the O'Reilly or...
The Sinn Féin candidate that
that's not evident. I've seen numerous posters for that O'Reilly or McReida.
Were you aware that she was a Sinn Féin candidate?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I only found that out there in the past few days.
So she misled the electorate?
Well, with all these posters up, it says nothing about Sinn Féin, and I saw not a tremendous amount in the west of Ireland when I was there last week, or earlier this week, and I saw them then in the east. So I thought she was an independent candidate, quite frankly, and that she must have had great support. But now it turns out Sinn Féin, so obviously they're responsible for all these posters, but she's not advocating the fact that she's a member of Sinn Féin. And when she appeared on the RTE programme, which the previous 7 years ago shafted Sean Gallagher, she wasn't asked anything about her Sinn Féin membership, because I looked at that.
So it appears that Sinn Féin have been up to dirty tricks in 2 election campaigns.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, they're not to be trusted. Because here they're in the south, and they seem to, nothing seems to please them. People are voting for them for what reason I do not know. They're in the north. They've managed to destroy the chances of the SDLP, who were instrumental in bringing power sharing to the north, and they're not now supporting power to Sinn Féin and the DUP, 2 extremist parties. They're not now supporting it, and they're leaving the people adrift in that country, that area. And so we don't know what their agenda is. So they have an agenda there, and I presume they'd have an agenda here as well. And I wouldn't like to see them in charge, or I don't even like to see them in the Dáil that much.
And finally, Joan Freeman. What do you think of Joan?
Well, unfortunately, I think our chances are pretty poor, although at least she's put her name forward. From my point of view, I understand she was pro-choice, which means pro-abortion. So anyone of that calibre I couldn't possibly support as a Catholic and a Christian. I don't support anything to do with the ending of life.
Okay, well, I think that's it. John Malone, do you have anything else to say about this presidential election?
I hope some of the independent candidates are successful. I would like to see this president be not part of the political establishment.
And I just want, did you actually watch any of the debates on RTE with Pat Kennedy?
7 years ago I looked at the one that when John Gallagher was shafted. So I haven't looked at too many. I happened to look at the one where where the candidates were on, with the exception of Higgins and John Gallagher. I looked at that, and the independent candidate or the other candidates were on, and I thought it was good enough, and it seemed to be fair. And Claire Byrne interviewed them, and really some of the questions that I find that the RTE presenters ask seem to me to be foolish. I don't see much merit in some of the questions that they ask, so quite frankly I don't want to waste my time looking at what they have to say, because they seem to have an angle and agenda that I certainly don't support.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much.